The midterms are upon us, and one of the top topics for the midterms in the US this year is inflation and the economy. And me as a climate nerd, obviously I want climate change to be up there with the issues too. But that's not just because I am a climate nerd. It's also because climate change directly impacts the inflation and economic problems. And today I just want to talk about how the clean energy transition and how climate change impacts the economy and inflation, and how, frankly, the Republican Party is not really seeing that those two are connected, or choosing not to see that those two are connected. So that's what I want to talk about today. This is going to be kind of a different video where I'm not necessarily scripting any of this. So if you like this style of video, let me know in the comment section below. But if you're curious where I get all my information from, I'm going to be putting in the editing phase all of the support for what I am saying. Buckle up, let's get into it. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckosphere, where we talk about climate news and solutions. I obviously focus a lot on the climate news, right? I cover at least 2 videos worth of climate news a week. And so I've seen some trends, and I want to just talk about some of those trends that I'm seeing as we are now in the voting session for the midterms. And that is, frankly, that climate change is definitely not being prioritized in the polls. It's not really surprising. Honestly, we've almost never had it prioritized in the polls, which kills me as someone who understands how important and scary it is. Now, full disclosure, I'm not a huge fan of our 2-party system, okay? I'm not really happy with either party right now. And I think a lot of environmentalists feel that way because environmentalists are like some of the worst at voting, which is crazy because you really should vote like the climate depends on it, because it kind of does. But something that a lot of voters that are going to vote do care about is inflation and the economy. Let's talk about it, because I think that it's a mistake to consider climate change and the economy separate voting issues. They absolutely are intertwined in each other. First of all, we're seeing climate change impact inflation. We're seeing it knock out supply chains and impact agricultural yield all around the world and here. For example, for the United States, we saw the Mississippi River dip to a low enough level that cargo ships were stalled on the river, and so that meant that the supplies carried from one place to another had to be decreased, which hurt the supply chains. We also saw Hurricane Ian slam into Florida, and that will definitely impact supply chains and the US economy too. It's hard to have one event be directly attributed to climate change. However, from what we understand and from now what attribution studies show is that climate change increases how much moisture is in the atmosphere just because warmer air holds more water. If the air warms by 1 degree Fahrenheit, then that increases how much water can hold by about 4%. And we have increased global temperatures by about 2 degrees Fahrenheit. So that is about 8% more moisture than it used to hold, which means that rainfall events and hurricanes can then dump more water on an area than they used to be able to, which equates to more damage. In addition to that, climate change is also increasing how warm ocean temperatures are, which increases the severity of these storms. So we're not necessarily seeing an increase in how many hurricanes there are, but we are seeing an increase in how intense these hurricanes are. There's also something that can be said with the fact that we are developing near more flood-prone areas, more fire-prone areas, and that also is increasing how many billion-dollar storms the United States is seeing per year. Both of those are true at the same time, and they're a very bad combination, which is why we very much need to prioritize climate change in our policies so that we understand that we need to adapt in a way that is beneficial to us and not continue to build in flood-prone and fire-prone areas, right? That was honestly just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how the climate crisis affects the global economy and the domestic economy. Some other things that I didn't even mention have to do with human health and productivity. When temperatures get hotter, human productivity goes down, whether it's through not being able to work outside as long hours or just people's mental state. People also get grumpier during hotter temperatures, and people don't sleep as well when it's hot too. So that's another way that human productivity declines. So these are other ways in which climate change will impact the global economy just due to human productivity and health. I think it's a false dichotomy that we think that if we do something about climate change and it impacts our GDP, the options are that we have that impact or GDP stays the same. And that's not true. If we don't do anything about climate change, that will drastically hurt our GDP. And it used to be that our GDP could take a slight dip through these clean energy transition efforts and preparing for climate change through adapting and changing our infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. It's a big transition, and I could see how many people would think that would hurt the GDP. But now at this point, because clean energy is so cheap and because we have advanced technologically in many different areas, we are not going to see our GDP really be hurt at all by this transition. Just the amount of global subsidies, if we're talking on a global scale, the amount of global subsidies that are given to fossil fuels, if those global subsidies were given to clean energy instead, then we would already be well our way through the transition. But instead, we are continuing to subsidize fossil fuels. Let's talk about fossil fuels for a sec, okay? When the Ukrainian war happened, the American Petroleum Institute immediately came out and was like, hey, the gas prices are pretty high, right? Maybe let's go ahead and lease more to fossil fuel companies so that they can produce more to lower our gas prices. Now, from an economics 101 perspective, that would make sense, right? You increase the supply and that decreases the prices. But the main problem with that whole idea is that fossil fuels are already sitting on a shit ton of land. They have already bought so much US land, enough to count for several states, and they are not producing on all of that land. Why are they not producing on all of that land? It literally sounds like a conspiracy, but it's actually true. They're not producing on all of that land because they don't want those prices to go down. And we're seeing that through how much record profits they're making, despite us seeing a potential for a recession and having to pay more at the gas prices. They are instead just raking in record profits. They don't care. They just don't. And when I talk about fossil fuel companies, I am not talking about workers, okay? Let's be clear about that. I'm pissed off with the execs. I'm pissed off with the PR people for the execs and the lawyers for the execs. This is not the workers. If we want to talk about workers, though, you know what they would benefit from? Seriously, what you guys would benefit from is the clean energy transition. Why? Because in the Inflation Reduction Act, money was put specifically to provide subsidies for companies that invest in traditional energy communities. That means the old mining towns that have existed for generations and have worked super hard to supply energy to our world, to our nation, they now will have an opportunity to get new jobs as we move into the future so that they are secure. That is a priority for the clean energy transition, is to do it equitably. The Midwest in particular is benefiting a lot from the clean energy transition. We're seeing factories for electric vehicles and for clean energy manufacturing going mainly into the Midwest. And that is not by accident. That is because there are subsidies there so that companies are incentivized to go to those areas. A lot of blue collar workers are being stranded by fossil fuel companies. They are seeing the amount of workers drop while they are bringing in more profits, and it's pissing people off. So maybe let's not prioritize fossil fuel companies because they clearly are just focusing on profits, right? We have climate change is impacting the global economy and is also impacting inflation. We have fossil fuel companies not giving a shit and making a ton of money, and we have them not lowering gas prices, which is also contributing to the inflation. So it's weird to me that while those things are true, we're seeing people wanting to move in the exact opposite policy decision. They want to see more land leased to fossil fuel companies. They want to fight efforts to move the clean energy transition along. And instead, Republicans are choosing to demonize things like electric vehicles, which, by the way, are only expensive now because they're a newer technology and we haven't increased the supply enough to decrease the price of those goods. The price of electric vehicles is already going down and will continue to see a decline. Like, if Republicans gain the House or the Senate or both, then they are going to muck up the waters when it comes to actually implementing things in the Inflation Reduction Act. It's law, but you can still muddy things up in the regulatory processes and how things are done and what things count within subsidies and what doesn't, like the American Gas Association wants to do with electrifying homes. There's money going towards subsidizing electrifying homes because now electricity is cheaper than gas, and also it's not good for you to have natural gas in your home. It's been found to emit benzene even when the appliance is not on, which can increase your risk of cancer. And so electrifying homes is just good for your health in general. But the American Gas Association wants the subsidies meant for electrifying your home to also count for gas, which would kind of defeat the whole purpose of it. So that's one of the lobbying efforts that Republicans are listening to right now as we could potentially see Congress flip. That's just one of many examples. There's also a lot of legal issues, right? We're seeing Republican state AGs that are suing the government to make it so that Biden can't put a price on carbon, which putting a price on carbon is just an economic method of letting the free market have a better understanding of the costs of items, right? It's just making a more realistic cost on emitting carbon, because we now know that emitting carbon should not be free. It's hurting our economy and it's also hurting human health. And so the price of it should reflect that. That's all that a price on carbon is. He has been sued now twice to not be able to implement that. And then on top of that, we're seeing things like the weakening of the EPA. Those are all efforts done by AGs suing the government, and it's mainly in Republican held states. And those elections are also on the ballot too. The AGs are super important for who we're electing. They need to be on the side of the clean energy movement because it just makes economic sense. And yet they are choosing to sue the government instead. So I'm frustrated. There's a lot of things at risk right now, and unfortunately climate change is not considered a priority for a lot of candidates and for a lot of voters, even though the majority of Americans think that it is a good thing to do. It's a good thing for us to transition. So those are my thoughts, and that's basically my argument on why climate change should be prioritized when you're picking your candidate. It's difficult because nowadays the amount of people that have their mind open to look at both candidates evenly and not just pick along party lines has drastically decreased. So I'm not really sure how helpful this video is at all. But I just wanted to share my thoughts about the trends that I'm seeing because it concerns me as someone who has seen the studies of what our future could look like if we don't take more action, which I just talked about in my last climate recap video. Definitely check it out. It's scary, and it's my future, and I want it to be better than what our current trajectory is. So if you find this video interesting, if there are people in your life that maybe would benefit from seeing this video, please share it around because I think it's really important. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. Thank you so much to the people on Patreon who help support me and my fur baby Rue. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous David H., Norman Anal, Greg H., Paul B., Phil Plasma, Dan Morton, Dane Chris, Nate, Specker, Bree C., climate teacher John J., Deanne, and Steve. I greatly appreciate your support of $5 or more. If you would like to support the Beccasphere, please check out the Patreon and buy me a coffee links in the description below for recurring or one-time payments. Bye for now.